Good afternoon and welcome to everyone who is joining us for our second event for LGBT History Month 2021 at LSBU. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for London South Bank University. Before we start, I'd just like to read a short webinar behaviour statement with you all. Everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback and comments and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including behaviour which potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable and warm experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. So just a bit of housekeeping for you all. We are on Zoom Pro, which means that you can turn your cameras and microphones on when it comes time for the Q&A. So if you're comfortable doing so and you're ready to ask a question when it comes to that time, please do pop your camera on and we'll come round to you. But if you're more comfortable using the chat box, please do that. Obviously, nature of virtual events, sometimes there are technical hitches. Please bear with us and we'll try our best to work through those as quickly as possible, but fingers crossed that will not be the case. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Alan, who's going to do a bit of scene setting for us. Alan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Neil. So hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Alan Tyler. I'm a psychology lecturer here at London South Bank University and co-chair of the SONET network, which is LSBU's lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, and allies staff network. We've put together this series, and it's really been a very collaborative effort to bring together some of our thought leaders from our community. And last week we spoke to Mike Sarna from Wellcome Trust, who's a museums consultant, and talking about how do we transform public engagement. And Neil's talked already about next week we're going to hear from Professor Emerita Raewyn Connell about how do we transform the higher education sector. So this week we're very lucky to have Lady Phyll with us, and I want to say local, but you can see from the background that that right now she's not local at all. But to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at LSBU before we start, I'll just take a quick minute to say for History Month, for LGBTQ History Month this year, what we've done is put together this thought leaders series that will extend across the entire year. So we won't be doing a weekly series throughout the entire year, says Neil, kind of brushing his forehead a little bit, but kind of monthly or every 6 weeks. And we wanted to kick off during History Month to bring together not just a kind of collection of some of our thought leaders, but to disrupt some of the echo chamber that can sometimes exist when we do LGBTQ events or events around particular identity politics. So the topics won't necessarily be lesbian and gay show and tell, which sometimes is the critique of some of our own community events. But also to say that we will be talking about an inviting discussion of some sensitive topics and some things that, whether it might be resonant with you personally or even more perhaps triggering, just to be aware that some of those conversations can come up, that we invite challenging conversations, and as Neil said, in a respectful way. But to be able to think of your own well-being and the well-being of the other people who are here today. So first I'll introduce Sanchia, who is our head of EDI at London South Bank University, and will be doing the hard work on behalf of LSBU, or the fun work. I don't know if I should say it's hard work at all, but the cognitive and emotional labor doing the hosting and the interviewing with our very special guest, Lady Phyll. And I sent a message to her in the chat just before we started saying, I've only ever seen your name in print. I haven't actually said it out loud before and no one's corrected me. So my first kind of cultural faux pas is to say your name incorrectly. I'll do my best. But Lady Phyll Opoku-Gyimah is the co-founder and executive director of UK Black Pride. She is currently the executive director of the Kaleidoscope Trust, and they'll be speaking a little bit more about that as we go. She has been head of political campaigns and equality for the Public and Commercial Services Union, as well as being an editor of an anthology of short stories, and this month, a guest editor of Diva magazine. So some exciting things to talk about, whether they come up in the audience Q&A or from questions from Sanchia. But I will hand over now, and thank you again all for joining us.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to everybody that has attended this event. This is part of London South Bank's events to mark LGBT History Month. As Alan said, I'm the Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion here at the university, and I'm really pleased that we'll be having a conversation with Lady Phyll. And I will have a conversation with her for a little while, and then we will throw it open to you guys. So do pop your questions in the chat if you have something that you would like to ask. So Lady Phyll, first of all, how are you?
I'm fine, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And I say here, I am abroad and have been for the last 2 months, but it's a pleasure to, I would say, share virtual space with you. We've known each other for a while and haven't actually touched base.
It's a pleasure to have you. I think one of the things that, I mean, you've done so much. One of the things that how we came to know each other was actually through the Labour Party. And I remember us probably being in, it would have been Manchester or Brighton, at a Labour Party conference talking about Black activism and how we get more, you know, Black and Asian people involved in politics. So I know that that is another string and another passion of yours as well. But where I wanted to start was just, I guess, thinking about your own journey to community organising and political organisation may be part of that. And I just wondered, you know, UK Black Pride is a very unique organisation. And I just wondered, what was your experience of setting up UK Black Pride, and who maybe inspired you, or what inspired you to establish UK Black Pride?
Yeah, well, you start off with the big question first, one that always makes me a little emotional, because UK Black Pride has been in existence for now 16 years this year. And in 2004, I was running an organisation called BLUK, B-L-U-K, which was Black Lesbians in the UK. And it was very much online, and we took it offline to just enjoy and connect with other like-minded women in a space where, you know, many of them had not even come out of the UK, out of London. And it was then when I was walking back to the bathrooms and the coach that I said, this feels so great to feel so liberated and empowered that we have got Black and brown queer women in one space that have so many commonalities and also understand each other's struggles. Mm-hmm. So I said, we're going to have a Black Pride in this country. And a couple of people around me, they were like, oh my gosh, here she goes again, thinking up her weird, wonderful ideas. And someone said, oh, you really want them to kill you in this country? I said, why? If there's a pride, then why can't we have a Black Pride to address particular things? So fast forward to 2005, I went to people who were supposed to be seen as leaders and pillars in our community. LGBT plus people who have been at the forefront of campaigning around Section 28, working within, you know, other organisations to amplify the work of LGBT rights. And I was asking them, we need your support, give us some advice, some guidance on how we can do this, because I really want there to be a Black Pride in this country. I kid you not, I was laughed at, I was jeered at, and one person told me, and I'm excusing my language from now, why don't you F off and go back to where you came from?
Wow.
Now, I'm from Islington originally, but if I knew what they meant. And it was then that I walked out of that room with my two other comrades, and I realized that just because you're part of a marginalized group, it doesn't make you exempt from being a bigot. And just because you're from that marginalized group, it doesn't mean you understand the various intersections of how our life meets. But we went ahead and we managed to get £427.77 to have the first Black Pride, which took place in South London. I guess your question is, what motivated me and others?
What motivated you even despite those setbacks? So you didn't say, well, that's it then, they've laughed in my face, so that means that this idea is dead. You continued.
Yeah, and I guess that continuation is because when you know that you stand on the shoulders of giants and people have paved the way for you to be here and occupy space, you know, that the answer is not just to sit back and fold your arms and say, okay, I'll wait for the right time, especially when in 2005 there was a real high rate, and you'll remember this in some of your campaigning that I was watching you do around Barking and Dagenham and the far right and the BNP spouting their rhetoric of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, the racism, the Islamophobia. So for us, the time for waiting was over. And it meant that even though we wanted to celebrate who we are as Black and people of colour from the queer community, we also knew that we had to address some of the challenges around racism within the LGBT plus community and also outside. So my motivation was community, was people, was understanding that, you know, the next generation are the ones that have to pick up the mantle in order to do this work, but you've got to make it easier for them to move forward.
Absolutely, and that's something that motivates me in my political career. It's despite the ups and downs, it's knowing that you can make a difference and have an impact in your community, and that's a really strong driver for me too. Was there anybody that sort of played a role in showing you sort of what community organising looked like? Anybody that inspired you?
Oh, so many people. You know, there was a Black gay and lesbian centre in Haringey, and you had people like Mark Thompson, you had Femi Otoju, you had Linda Bellos, you had Monica Beadle, you had Veronica McKenzie. There were so many people. So before we even started UK Black Pride, I went and spoke to a couple of them to understand what had happened in the past that helps shape the now that takes us into the future. So yeah, they were all inspirational figures and figureheads that are not necessarily seen in the wider mainstream LGBT sort of platforms, media, TV, or, you know, journals. So yeah, and I guess Audre Lorde, I can't go without saying, just her work alone and her writing inspires me every day to do what I do.
And how have you managed to sustain the momentum? So obviously UK Black Pride, as you say, 16 years old and it has grown. And I know you had partnered with Hackney Council just before the lockdown, and we're hopefully looking forward to that event taking place. But how have you, you know, sustained the organisation over all this time, and successfully so as well?
Yeah, so I think there's one thing that I've learned is that in any movement building, you have to work in collaboration with people.
Yeah.
And you cannot, the civil rights movement didn't come about just from one person saying, I'm going to do this and make it happen. It took a collaborative effort. So even though in the beginning, nobody wanted to work with UK Black Pride, they saw us as a separatist organisation, we managed to obtain allies. And those allies were really instrumental to helping shift the narrative and open up doors that and spaces that we haven't historically occupied. And I guess that there's so much power in community. We've seen this through the resurgence of Black Lives Matter. When people are aggrieved or they're hurt and they're in pain, they will come together in a way that, it's either about protesting, it's either about thinking about how do you lobby government, how do you change legislation. And I think the power of community is what's kept us going. And knowing that we stand true to our mission, our vision and our values, and it's an event which is by us and for us, and of course, allowing our friends into our space.
Absolutely. I mean, community organising is so powerful, and that's how we turned around the British National Party, as you mentioned, from Barking and Dagenham. It was really connecting and listening to the community. That's how Barack Obama, that was one of his key movements in becoming the president. So I wanted us to talk a little bit about intersectionality. And for those of you who are sort of not familiar with the term, I guess it's about not putting people into one box. So if I use myself as an example, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I suffer from a long-term health condition. And so, I can identify with, disability issues and needing flexibility and needing support and, anti-racism issues and gender issues. And I wondered how intersectionality had featured in your life, of Lady Phyll, and why you felt, if you feel that an intersectional approach to equality and diversity is important.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant question, because when we look at intersectionality as a framework, I think often people feel it's a bit of a buzzword and that it means diversity, when actually, this word that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 was because she found a gap in the way Black women needed to be supported in the workplace. So as a legal scholar as she was, she managed to take this further to the courts and find comparators. So for me, in terms of looking at things through an intersectional lens and having that framework, it's understanding that there are many different identities in which we all carry. And some of those identities have faced oppression and marginalization. So as a Black woman who is of working class background, who also speaks other languages, you will find that race that plays a factor and the racism that you can endure. Being of a particular gender, a woman, and I say woman with an X to make sure I'm incorporating my trans siblings, the sexism and the misogyny, and also the misogynoir, which is relatable to Black women in particular. The noir part is the Black of misogyny that happens to Black women. And then also in terms of class, being of a different socioeconomic background, you know that there's discrimination and oppressions that people face because of that. So if all of those intersect and overlap with one another, you'll find that the moment you erase talking about gender or sexual orientation, that you're erasing a part of that person's identity. So when we started UK Black Pride, it wasn't just to look at it from a place of, oh, we need an event, but it was to look at it from an intersectional lens, taking into account that LGBT mainstream activities does not really include us. It's not talking to the issues of religion, faith, belief, It's not speaking about how Black and POC communities come out differently, or there may be some different challenges. And it wasn't speaking to our cultures and our heritages and so forth. So we took, and we continue to take, an intersectional approach to how we organise UK Black Pride. So for me, the word seemed rather new, but it was not new in our approach to what we do.
Absolutely. And you're so right, because things may affect different groups differently. And we've seen with the pandemic how, you know, different groups, people with disabilities, people of colour, we're all affected by the pandemic, but we've been affected in different ways. And so sometimes you do need to dig a little deeper and find out how it is affecting different groups in different ways. You mentioned, Lady Phyll, about, you know, people of colour sometimes having, you know, different journeys in terms of coming out. And I wondered if you'd be comfortable enough to share a little bit about your journey in terms of coming out and how that was for you as a woman of colour.
Yeah, sure. It's, I guess what I would say, it's an ongoing journey, because every time I'm asked a question, it means that I have to come out again, and sometimes unearth things. And, you know, I put a strong caveat at the side of this, that not everyone needs to come out, so not everyone should have to come out. And when you do come out, make sure that you've got your network and you feel supported and safe in your environment. For me, I'm a mother of a 25-year-old, and, you know, she's amazing in pictures. Sometimes she gives me a real headache, but I had an intimate relationship with a man, and which was one that was quite volatile and negative and toxic, but I always knew there was something very different about me. But coming from a very strict Christian background and household, my parents are Ghanaian, they came to this country for a better life for their children. It is about education, 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 and that's it. And you don't bring dishonor or shame onto your family. When my daughter was 2, I came out.
Wow.
I wrote a letter. Yeah. I wrote a letter to my parents. It was like a Dear John, but a Dear Phyll letter. And it was like about 3 pages long. And I also came out to my daughter's father, which was probably the hardest thing to do, because I guess his background, being a Jamaican man, and understanding that actually, you know, there is no place for you to be LGBT. It became very violent, and it erupted in a way that left me in a safe house.
Wow.
And I guess even though we talk about what happens abroad, there are still many people that find themselves in situations in the UK where it's unsafe to come out. So, I mean, my mother, who was absolutely beside herself, you would have thought that I was going to be getting the death penalty for something that I did so wrong. She prayed through holy water, told me that I needed to go to church because this wasn't right. So it all felt very, very difficult and a tumultuous time. I also had 2 very good friends at the time who I mentioned this to, and I left with one friend because one of them said, my religion and my faith is incompatible with your lifestyle. And I left it there because I guess not everyone's on that journey with you. Absolutely. But I also felt a sense of unveiling the mask. I felt a sense of I was no longer lying, even though I was in this safe house and I had nothing, not even cutlery, no bedding, nothing. I had to start all over again. But that starting all over again for me was the point at which I knew this is my journey. And this is a way to make real and talk truth to power about who you are and how you wish to live and how you glide and navigate through the world. But I also had a young child at the same time. And yeah, I could go on. The rest is long, but yeah, I'm at a place now where my parents, my mother is at tolerance stage, and I guess that tolerance for me from her is maybe about as good as it's going to get. Being out for over 20 years, and she's from a generation that doesn't always understand, and we're from a country that there is no word for lesbian, gay, unless it's derogatory. And we still have colonial era laws that exist.
Yes, and it does so for many countries. And so, yes, 20 years is a long time, and you've achieved so much. I wondered if I could talk a little bit about the work, you know, at the Kaleidoscope Trust, because you were appointed executive director, and I know, you know, the work of that trust also probably takes an intersectional approach there. So congratulations. And what are the priorities for you in that role?
Well, you know, I'm so pleased to be working and leading a charity that does amazing work. And Kaleidoscope Trust is really there to, how do I put it, really uphold human rights for LGBT plus people around the world, but primarily in the Commonwealth. So our work consists of, you know, we make sure that activists and change makers and community organizations around the world have the funding and the resources and the training they need to get their work done. So there's an enormous amount of capacity building, resource mobilization, strengthening communities. And the strongest suit about Kaleidoscope Trust is that we move through corridors of power. UK, when I say those corridors of power, it's about where change is actually enacted. So when you think of your parliamentarians, the MPs, whether it's European Parliament or whether it's working with British High Commissioners who are based within the Commonwealth, we have direct access to them to lobby, to inform, to let them know what's happening in the continents and the regions in which we're working in, to try and help us prioritize, you know, the emerging and dire needs of what's happening to LGBT plus people abroad. And I guess for, you know, another priority would really be around grassroots organisers and key decision makers, and trying to ensure that Kaleidoscope Trust shouldn't have to exist, you know, so that they can do the advocating and the lobbying for themselves. And, you know, I'm not saying for 1 minute that I don't want KT to exist, but I guess organizations don't often think about, you know, its purpose and why it was set up. And what we have to do to make sure we're no longer needed, because then we would have human rights for all.
Absolutely. And we're striving for that, not just equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. Everybody having, you know, positive experiences. And so I think, as you say, succession planning in terms of the vision and how do we actually make sure we have sustainable change is really, really important. So I wanted to sort of just come on to the last couple of questions, and I'll just encourage our audience to start putting their questions for Lady Phyll in the chat as I start to wrap up. I mean, you've talked a lot about your journey in terms of what you've done and your experiences and setting up UK Back Pride and all the challenges that you face there, and obviously the work that you're doing now. I wondered if you could maybe enlighten us about, you know, the leaders of today in sort of the LGBTQ plus movement. Are there any leaders? You talked about, you know, the Kaleidoscope Trust, and hopefully, you know, there would be a time that would be needed. Are there any leaders apart from yourself out there who are building on the work, on the foundations that have been laid by yourself and other pioneers?
Oh my gosh, yes. There are so many. And I guess this is where, when we're movement building, we have to, one, remember the past and those that came before us, and acknowledging who's here and now. There are organizations like Exist Loudly, which works predominantly with young, queer, Black POC youth. And then you've got, and that the person behind that's like Tanya Compass. You've got Galdem, which is a platform, yeah, and then AZ Mag, and you've got Rainbow Noir in Manchester. So there are so many, and I guess for UK Black Pride, this is where we may see ourselves very much as an umbrella of protection because of how and where we access and who we access, that we bring all of these amazing organizations together and the people that are instrumental in leading them, and try to amplify exactly what they're doing. And when you're able to amplify all of these various platforms and people, those are your leaders, because leading doesn't mean that you control everything. There's certain bits of like leadership that's required in our youth engagement, in our trans engagement, in our intersex engagement, that makes all of them leaders.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I love about organizations like Galdem and Black Ballad is that they take an intersectional approach. They also take a regional approach. I mean, I know we're all online, but still making sure that things are not London-centric, that making sure we're taking a whole nation's approach and a global approach. And I think taking that holistic approach is so important, because there are different points of view and there are different experiences compared to city, compared to rural, and all of those sorts of things are important.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I know I'm speaking about UK Black Pride quite a bit, but that regional approach and understanding that you have to get deeper into communities and not allow it just to sit in London alone, is that, you know, Bobby from Bradford who might be a Muslim Black young person, will have a different experience of Sonia, who may be in Bristol in the southwest, because what access do they have to various things? And UK Black Pride, certainly last year for its virtual online event, we made sure that we reached out to all of the different regions and different communities, like our refugee, asylum seeker and migrant community, because having stuff online doesn't mean it's accessible to all. Absolutely. So money that we raised through like our Black Lives Matter campaign and what we've been doing, we pushed it back into those communities to top up their data, to make sure that they could be part of an online event. Because when you think about what they earn or what they don't earn, and they have like £5 to last for 2 weeks on their phone, they can never join an online event if that's their only means of connecting to other communities.
So, yeah, and again, that's where this pandemic has really highlighted those inequalities, you know, with access to IT, needing not just broadband, but high speed broadband is really important. And people like Marcus Rashford just highlighting the poverty and inequality that people are facing. It's really important that we reach out to those who may not have a voice. And it's people like us and all of us here that can actually be their voice while we equip them to be able to speak for themselves. What would you like to pass on? So obviously you're got a very long career ahead of you, but what would you want people to say that they knew you for in the future? Oh, I think you've gone on mute, Lady Phyll.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow. So I think I'd like to be remembered for somebody that's kind and compassionate, that's understanding and loving, that's clear about what I've always wanted to achieve, which is about eradicating, eliminating racism, all forms of discrimination that touches our lives. And I guess I'd like young Black girls, especially young Black dark-skinned girls, to know that they are perfect in every way, even though society will smack you in the proverbial mouth with everything that they have. Because there's something that, you know, Black women go through throughout their school, their work and society. And when you look at some of those root causes, it may have been because of things from colonialism, enslavement, slavery, and we've been treated badly and unfairly. So I would like to leave that word to especially young Black girls, that you are perfect in every way.
Absolutely. And you're so right there, because we struggle as Black women with so many issues. A stereotype that we struggle with is, you know, being labelled as aggressive, or the angry Black woman, when other women that are assertive of another hue are not labelled as such. You talked about the misogyny and the misogyny that Black women face, and we know that Diane Abbott now, it doesn't really matter whether you like Diane Abbott or don't like her, but the point is that she gets the most abuse compared to all other MPs put together. And she has to face that, and she has to live with that day after day.
Yeah. And you know, it's draining, it's painful, and it takes a toll on one's mental health. And I guess mental health should be a factor of when we're talking about LGBT rights and the histories that we have. Is the work of an activist or someone who even signs the petition or does something. You've got to make sure you're putting your mindset first, because we all have poor and ill. We all have mental health, but when it becomes poor or ill, that's the point at which we cannot keep on doing what we've got to do. But, you know, Diane, love her or loathe her, she has been so stoic in keeping up face and continuing in the face of adversity, as, you know, as a Black woman in Parliament, the first Black woman in Parliament.
Yeah. And that's what we do. We have to face macroaggressions and microaggressions and still deliver the goods. I'd just like to end just by saying, what are your hopes for the future? So, you know, what are your hopes for UK Black Pride or Kaleidoscope and the communities that you serve? What are your hopes for the future?
Oh, equality, equity, justice, rights for all, you know, leaving no one behind, and making sure that everything we do takes a very intersectional approach or uses an intersectional lens. And I hope for Kaleidoscope Trust in particular that we're able to really shift the legislation around the various countries which still criminalize LGBT plus persons today, where they're unable to live their true selves and be authentic in their loving as well.
And again, the pandemic has highlighted that, because, you know, people may be stuck in a situation where they don't feel that they can actually be themselves, whereas prior they were able to sort of work around that. So thank you so much for just being so open and just sharing. It's been fascinating. I've learned even more about you, and I'm just so proud of what you've achieved. And I know that, as you say, in another 5-10 years, there will be more achievements to come. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to our events manager, Neil. I have seen some questions pop up in the chat. And so, Neil, please take it away with the questions.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for such an inspirational interview. And your final words about what you'd like to be remembered for, just alongside your activism, you know, being kind and loving, is just really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. We have some questions, and actually I'd like to invite the people that have popped their questions, if you'd like to ask them live, to join us on screen, and that's David, Bradley, and then Zara. But Lady Phyll, I have something that I'd kind of like to put to you, if that's okay. You've spoken about kind of the intersectional approach of UK Black Pride, and I think that's, you know, it's key. And I guess as a white gay man, I'm really curious to know what, and this is not a pride, this is not this is not an opportunity to, this is not me asking you to bash other prides, but what is missing in other prides when it comes to an intersectional approach, because it is clearly missing.
Well, I laughed when you said bash other prides. I wouldn't dare do so.
Of course.
I think that, you know, running and organising a pride is extremely difficult. You know, most of us are doing this as volunteers with very little resources and funding. But what I have seen in my 15 plus years of going to prides is that when you do not have voices which reflect the communities you serve, you're kind of doing them an injustice. You're putting them to one side, and your allyship is not really allyship. The one thing missing for me is solidarity towards various struggles. So if our Muslim communities are going through something which is some serious hardship, how do we stand up and support them? So your allyship has got to be rooted in solidarity. If it's not, then you can't call it allyship.
So it needs to be authentic and genuine, and and not performative as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bradley, David has a question first. I have mixed feelings about straight allies coming to Pride and potentially changing the nature of it. I can imagine a lot of people who are not queer people of colour wanting to attend Black Pride with the best intentions to support the event, but I wonder how you feel about that and what you'd like people to do if they want to show their support.
Who asked the question? I'm sorry.
It's David. David, if you'd like to come on camera, you're more than welcome to. Hi there, here's David.
Brilliant. Okay. So David, thank you so much for your question. And, you know, you're right. There are lots of different people who will attend a Pride which is for our LGBT plus communities. But at the same time, we also want to have allies. So I guess when we shape our narrative, when we're talking about what UK Black Pride means, or what Pride means, and the genesis and the origins of how we've got here, we're telling them that we're inviting you into our space. Just like I would tell you, Neil, or I would tell you, Alan, I want you at Black Pride, but I'm inviting you into this space. As long as you know that Black and POC queer people are centred in this. It is a pride that's by us and for us. But if you wish to be here, support us, donate to us, come and see how we celebrate, but also how we challenge, and think about what your solidarity and actions will look like. So David, thank you for that question.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer, because I think particularly as a white person who lives in Britain, it's very rare for me to be in a minority, and so, you know, going into a space like that, if that's welcome, it can be a really interesting experience in terms of me understanding what it's like to be a racial minority and to maybe feel like I'm not the center of everything, and, you know, so it can be a really sort of learning event for everyone. So thank you.
Thanks,
Great
David.
question.
Thank you. Bradley, I believe you'd like to come and speak to Lady Phyll. You are welcome to join us. Hi there, Bradley.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, Bradley.
Okay, hello. First of all, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everybody involved. Just hearing your experience and your knowledge and your wisdom is it's immeasurable. So thank you so much for all your time. So at the moment, I'm representing a company called the Intersectional Unicorn. And our ultimate goal is to try and weave unity without all spectrum of the LGBTQ plus community. And the way we're doing at the moment is trying to take as many stories as we can from all over the community, and then using our experience as writers to add a more professional veneer, staying true to these people's voices and offer them back out. But at the moment, we're finding a huge deficit in stories outside of white cis men. We are well aware this could be because we're just starting up, we're still trying to galvanize some interest, but we are also worried that it could be a case of underrepresented or marginalized individuals are less likely to share their stories. So I want to ask, how would you suggest or advise we go about this to show that people, show these people that we want to tell their stories, we want to stay true to their experiences? Like hearing your story just before, we know that they're not all going to be wonderful and empowering stories. Some of them might be difficult or like rife with obstacles, but we want to have a true reflection, a raw, holistic reflection of the LGBTQ plus community. So how would you suggest we go about that, getting these stories from people who aren't more comfortable sharing them?
Well, thank you, Bradley, for your question. I guess I probably have more questions about who is asking for these stories, where are they going to be, and how are they being asked for? Because if you take right now in this present day and age, there's a lot of burnout in Black and POC communities. You know, Sanchia mentioned already about how COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting Black and POC communities. And that means that we're tired. We're also feeling like during an LGBT History Month or a Black History Month or an International Women's Day, our expertise is being extracted, and yet still, you know, we don't really get anything for it, but we're having to open up traumas and wounds that maybe we don't have like a Black Minds Mental Health Matters to support us through giving you this information. So it's just to think very sensitively about your approach to asking for the information, but also giving clarity about why you want to present to the world their authentic stories, because those authentic stories aren't often heard. And some of your approaches could be, and I use UK Black Pride as an example, you could write to UK Black Pride and say, it would be really great if maybe there was some collaborative work, because we want to amplify not just the stories of individuals, but organizations, like when Sanchia mentions about, you know, who are the leaders? What are the organizations? Collaboration at the moment is how you are going to bring about unity. And when you have got a loud and informed voice or voices, it makes it absolutely impossible for society to turn down the volume. So collaboration, contact, and amplification of other organizations with a clear, clarified position as to why you want these stories.
Perfect.
Hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much. It is incredibly helpful. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thanks, Bradley. Zara, I believe we'd like to come over to you for your live question. Hi there, Zara.
Hello. Thank you so much for your fantastic talk, and especially kind of your coming out story was really poignant, because I think as people of color, often our coming out stories are so different from like the white people in our spaces. So it's kind of always very reassuring to hear, even if it is not the smoothest story, other people's experiences. So thank you for that. My question was, I'm really interested to know what, like, kind of as a community organizer, what practical steps and actions we can take to kind of open up and encourage representation and kind of even just presence of, I guess, like more minority communities, such as kind of people of color and disabled people within already minority communities, such as kind of women's spaces and queer spaces. Yeah, and kind of what very practical applications we can do for that.
Thank you so much, Zara, for your question, and also just acknowledging that, you know, people of colour, our journeys of coming out and that continual journey never kind of ends, because there's so many different challenges coming from different areas. But you asked about practical steps around community building and organising. I would say to anybody who says they want to be an activist or they want to advocate for change is one to think about, you know, what arena or area do you want to look at? So if it's around queer people of colour who happen to be women and refugees, you know, I always say Google is your friend, or the organisations are there. So Micro Rainbow, Rainbow Noir, they are doing some amazing work. And they normally have some resources or some information about how you can get involved. But I would also read up and think about, or not read up, I'd also think about your own transferable skills. So let's take Dr. Alan Tyler, I guess, you know, has a PhD and maybe very, very well versed on a particular bit of legislation. Every advocacy piece of work requires finance, understanding the law, understands how to organise from grassroots, would require speakers, will require IT people, comms people. So what skill do you have that you believe you can offer maybe, I don't know, 10 hours a month to this organisation? And that way you're taking action and you're able to support in a way that, you know, you're utilising your skills and helping grow an organisation or a small community group. And I would just say your workplace is another way at which, you know, there can be actions that are taken. So you will have staff networks, you know, you may have a trade union that you're involved in, which will have particular self-organized groups. It may be, you know, this student body that's looking for more people to be part of the LGBT network, who may be people of color that can speak to those lived experience. And I would just say, get involved, but think about how much time you want to commit. I hope that was helpful, Zara.
Yeah, that really is. Thank you.
Thanks, Zara. Thanks, Zara. Diego, I'd like to invite you to ask your question. Oh, Diego? Alan, do you have a question in the meantime?
Sorry, I had to find my mute. Oh, sorry, Diego, there you are. Go ahead.
Sorry, can you guys see me?
We can't see you, but you're welcome to ask it via audio.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm not being able to connect my video. My question is, I believe the LGBT and the BMI movements are interconnected because they both about fighting against discrimination. Both of you at the beginning of this chat we're talking about sustainable change. There were 20 years between the George Floyd incident and Stephen Lawrence's inquiry. My question is, do you feel that we progressed or we regressed in those 20 years? Of course, preserved the geography differences of both incidents, yeah, and then can we establish a yield between advances on LGBT rights and the fight against racism? I'm not sure if I made myself clear, but
yeah, Diego, you did, and thank you so much for your question. I hope I didn't cut you off because I heard parts of it, but I really think I caught, you know, the comparator between LGBT rights and Black Lives Matter movement. I guess within any movement, there will be parallels and there will be connections. And for me, there are many synergies and connections that I've made with LGBT rights and Black Lives Matter movement. Let's take, for example, Stonewall riots. we know that the people at the forefront of Stonewall riots happen to be Black and brown POC queer people, whether they were trans, gender non-conforming, they were at the forefront, and they campaigned and advocated for, against the brutality of the treatment that they received from the police. They campaigned around health inequalities. They campaigned around the lack of education and awareness. And then when you think about, and also housing, let me not forget that, because that's something Sylvia Rivera spoke a lot about, when it came to housing inequality. So then when you think about Black Lives Matter, and even though there's been the resurgence, you have to look at the root causes of why we are talking about Black Lives Matter, not just in the States, but also here in the UK. The UK has had a number of deaths in custody. The UK has had the Macpherson report that highlighted over 30 recommendations that told us that the police was, that the Metropolitan Police Force was institutionally racist. So when you think about those comparisons, of course, it means that POC and Black communities are faced with so many different challenges which are similar, whether it's here or abroad. So I think that we've made progress, of course. We've seen the Equality Act come in. We've seen the right for equal partnership, equal marriage, civil unions. We've seen, lots of things change, but then we also see a regression when we have things like Grenfell and a number of people who died in those flats because of the cladding happen to be Black and brown people. And is that because of class, or is it because of their status? Is it because of poverty? Well, there's some questions there that are really unanswered. And then some of the other regressions that we've seen here today, right now, is around how our trans siblings are being treated. The violence on their minds and their bodies on a daily basis, a constant onslaught of what is happening to them around toilets, around this. Their lives should not be debated. They should be able to survive, live, thrive the same way anybody else should. So yes, we can see progress in one hand, but we see regression in another. And I guess that's where we're not finding the balance, because, some people say, oh, we've got to focus on equal rights for, I don't know, let's say, I'm just hypothetically saying this, disabled people, but they're not thinking about disabled people who may be young, who are also people of colour. And that's the intersectional approach and the lens in which we need to take in order to have progress for all. And, it's that, I'm trying not to go into a rant, sorry, Diego, but that's the whole thing about, your struggle has to be my struggle, and my struggle has to be your struggle, and it must be rooted in solidarity for all. So I hope that answers that, but I know you said about advancements, and I could talk about advancements of LGBT rights abroad when we've just seen today that Jamaica has seen a gosh, how do I put it? There's a ruling which talks about Jamaica not meeting the international rights standards. And they are now saying that they are going to think about how LGBT people are criminalized in Jamaica. That is a huge landmark ruling for the Caribbean. And of course, I guess there'll be opposition to that, but that's an advancement. You've seen repeal 377, India. You've seen Botswana, case 164 in its penal code. You've seen Angola just the other day, which has enacted its penal code and will now, anyone who's found to discriminate LGBT people will get 2 years imprisonment or will face, the courts. Those are advancements, but we have a long way to go. And I guess some of it also starts from home. So I'll stop there because I could go on and on, Diego.
And
so I hope...
just to complete my, is there a way that we can together find the balance and making sure that everything is advancing at a similar pace?
I think that there is a way, and it's not an easy way, because it will take collaboration. It will take for more conversations like this and more questions and more unpacking. And it will also take for people to feel uncomfortable, because we then have to open up and address issues of structural and systemic racism. We have to open up the conversation around colonialism, the empire, and what it did, and those colonial era laws. It will take for us to understand, you know, whether it's the HIV and AIDS crisis and who was impacted by it. It will take so many things, but collaboration is key. And I guess with that unity and that collaboration going forward, we can make greater strides than trying to do it on an ad hoc basis.
Thank you, Diego.
Thank
Alan,
you. Thank you very much.
Alan, did you want to jump in there?
I do. If you'll give me chair's pleasure of asking, I wanted to bring together a couple of threads that you talked about with Sanchia. I mean, I've got about 10 questions for you, and really I want to kind of, you know, buy you a coffee and sit down and you know, or bring you in again and have you come back and talk to us. But you've talked about, one of the things that I want to ask about is capacity building, right? You've talked about capacity building, and you've also talked about the power of community. And then you've talked about the importance of us seeing that dark-skinned Black girl to be able to see herself, right? And then you've also talked about the kind of exhaustion or the fatigue of returning again and again to individuals and to certain organizations. So you can, I don't know if you can see kind of where I'm going with this, but how can we, and I'm asking, you know, on behalf of London South Bank University, as an example of an organization that has a diverse and talented workforce, but also, you know, a set of assets, how can we add to our assets in a way that will help you to add to your assets? And how can we do that in a way that helps, I'm going to use, you know, an us and you, because you're the guest at LSBU and now you're a part of our learning community. But how can we help you to build that capacity for your standpoint and your perspective?
I can tell you're a doctor. Okay, that's many questions. And I guess this follows and segues nicely after Diego's question. But so, look, you mentioned capacity building, the power of community, the inner Black girl that I see all the time, and also that exhaustion. So if you want to be a true ally, and I've already said it has to be rooted in solidarity, I also think that allyship is situational. And in it being situational, it means that there are a number of things you can do. You know, the first one being listening, and listening with kind ears and not judgmental ears. So if I say to you, this is how I feel working at South Bank University as a Black woman who happens to be queer, I don't want you to say, oh, well, that's never happened before. You know, I'm really shocked that that's happened to you, because that's not really listening. That is being reactive and defensive to something that I'm saying. But listening really takes an amount of control to actually hear somebody, and then you ask the question, what can I do once you've listened? Then I think in this situational allyship, there's also standing shoulder to shoulder or sitting shoulder to shoulder with me on a protest, on a march, on a demonstration, putting out a statement from the University of South Bank saying, you know, we are vehemently opposed to X, Y, and Z that's happening. Of course, I understand some of the sensitivities of getting too political, and you must make sure that, you know, it's sort of not partisan. But you can still speak up in the situations of injustice. It's like Desmond Bishop Tutu says, if you're neutral in the situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. And, you know, really that is very much about, don't sit on the fence, because it may not be you today, but it will be you tomorrow. Then in that other part of situational allyship, I guess it's putting your money where your mouth is. In your staff networks, money should be given towards engaging with prides, being on a pride march. You know, I would say support some of the smaller prides like Reading, Norwich, Ipswich, and always support UK Black Pride, but that's because I'm biased. So I'm trying to like open it out a bit, because these are prides that don't necessarily have the resources that larger prides have. And if it costs UK Black Pride 100k to put on an event for a free event, which is safe, then the way we're going to get that money is by working with, speaking at particular events, or, you know, asking your staff networks to support in volunteering their time as well. And then I just think the last thing that people can do to be allies is to do your own homework and research. You know, I am not going to continually use my labor to make others feel better about what they don't know if they haven't done some of the groundwork. And as a university with your many amazing students, scholars, researchers, they should be able to pull some resources together for you on Black history, on LGBT history, and that way you can figure out who should we source this month and pay them for their time to be part of our conversations. So I hope that that was helpful, because that stops burnout. That stops us feeling incredibly tired, because for years and years and years, we have had our labor extracted from us by force. And I guess the time is over for us to continue to give labor for free without some sort of payment or support back. And your question is so beautiful in a sense that I'm going to come away from this conversation knowing that you've dug deep to figure out how can you help. Are you crying?
That's brilliant. Thanks very much with that. That's
Thank you.
Thank you. A bit like Alan, we could carry on talking to you for absolutely hours. I've got, you know, loads of questions, but I think that was such a unique, beautiful way to end it. So actually, I think that we will end it there, if that's okay with everyone, just because that seems like a really solid note to end on.
Can I say, Neil, though, I really want to thank you all, Sanchia, for just that time, for you allowing me to have this space and all the questions. And if there's anything afterwards that might need addressing, because we could go on for ages, I'm happy to answer it afterwards, so it doesn't feel like a complete shutdown of conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Alan, I'll hand over to you to close.
Well, what I wanted to do really was to hand over to Sanchia, because I think she's a really better placed than me to say the thank you and offer final thoughts.
Well, thank you so much to Lady Phyll, just for really answering those questions so openly and honestly. And I think you've really given some practical advice for people, something that they can actually take away and work on. And, you know, allyship is so important. You know, we saw with the virtual prize last year that they were holding up Black Lives Matters banners, and that's what it's all about. It's all about, you know, having your movement, but also recognizing that there are other marginalised group that we all need to speak out for. So thank you so much, Lady Phyll, for giving up time out of your busy schedule to be with us virtually. Thank you to Neil, our events manager, for organising. Thank you to you, Alan, for having the inspiration for this event. And thank you to all of you who have attended and just also shared your hopes and your fears and your questions. And I hope, as I say, that you're able to take something away and do participate in the rest of the events that we have and that a lot of other universities and organisations are having, just to raise awareness and just to find out more about how you can get involved in this movement. So thank you.